pillars that stood in front of the bank and the pedestal on which the clock stood at the town square were laid about 100 years ago. And yet, when the tornado blew through Lancaster 2 weeks ago, these structures remained standing, even though many other things around them were destroyed and leveled to the ground. When you saw these pictures of these things, or perhaps you may have seen them for yourself, did you wonder, as I did, what kind of strength had been put into that foundation or into those structures that they would be able to stand when so much devastation was all around them? As I thought about it, I thought of it as a parable of a question or an issue with which I wanted to deal today. What are the foundations that we need to lay as families that we may be able to stand in the turbulent and perplexing times in which we live? What is it that families and individuals who make up those families may need that we not only will endure, but that we will be able to stand, and having done all things, to stand? I think it's important that first of all we look at the gathering storm or the kind of challenges that we face as families in our culture. The first thing is to understand what we mean when we use the word family. Prior to 1950, it was pretty clear what we meant when we said family. We meant a husband, a father, and a mother, and an average of 2 children. But since that time, the image has radically changed. That represents only about 7% of the households in America today, according to the 1990 census. 1 out of every household today is made up of a single parent and 1 or more children. Many other households are made up of divorced parents who are married and who have brought children together into a blended family. And then there are the individuals who simply no longer have a family of origin to which they belong and have joined in other families. So we need to understand what we mean when we say family. We also must accept the fact that for every 2 marriages which are performed, there is a 1 divorce. We also can understand that after World War II, because so many mothers went to work during the war effort, that the old idea of a woman getting married and staying at home and being a wife and mother has also changed, because that represents only 5% of the women in the United States today, and 25% of those who are married say they have no intention of becoming mothers. One of the things which has impacted this kind of change in our culture very much is the fact that during the years from 1946 to 1964, 75 million babies were born. It has been called the baby boom, and those who were born during that period are called baby boomers. This unprecedented growth was not foreseen, it was not expected, and certainly there were no particular plans for its happening. In fact, after World War II, it had been projected that there would be a decline in childbirth in America. The experts, the government, and no one else made plans for this kind of vast growth in population, and especially for the productivity it would require for taking care of all of these children and of helping them grow to maturity. During this time, also, there was an information explosion. The accumulated knowledge doubled at the rate of every 5 years, and in a 50-year period, the accumulated knowledge that we have was equal to all of the accumulated knowledge which had been gathered prior to that time. At the same time, we in America experienced the greatest economic, industrial, and technological expansion in the history of human civilization. So there not only was a mass accumulation of new lives with which to deal, there was also widespread affluence and prosperity. At the beginning of this period, there was a man, Dr. Benjamin Spock, who wrote a book entitled The Common Sense Book of Child and Baby Care. He, more than any other individual, influenced and impacted psychologically, at least, the thinking concerning child rearing. His philosophy was different from what it had been prior to that time. He suggested that it is the parents' responsibility to meet the needs of their children, not children to be a joy for their parents. He suggested that no longer were children simply to be seen and not heard, but that they were to be heard and heeded. He also is associated with the idea of permissive behavior and suggested that if you say no to a child, you may damage their psyche. And so during that period, there was an adjustment in what it meant to parent and to be family. Because of the affluence and because of the number of children, society as well and government had the responsibility of meeting the needs of those children and thus of communicating the idea that you were special. New schools had to be built. New textbooks had to be written. New cars had a different design every year. New homes were built, although many people chose to rent or to lease because of the frequency of transfer or of upward mobility. Mass transportation and travel became the natural thing. Shopping malls began to replace the neighborhood store. Plastic toys became the thing in a throwaway generation, and every day was the same as Christmas or Easter because parents did not go to the store without being expected to bring something home with which to play. It became a disposal or disposable generation, from diapers to quick food and eating out and many other kinds of experiences such as that. It became the development of a culture of immediate gratification and of great expectations, largely with someone else being responsible for making sure that that kind of level of living and prosperity continued. When President Kennedy announced that we were going to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade and that we were going to beat Russia in space, there was no question we would do that. After his tragic death, President Johnson initiated the war on poverty, and we believed that we could wipe it out. I remember being a part of a group in Dallas who were determined that no child in Dallas would go to bed hungry at night. Medical science gave us many new wonderful and miracle drugs to cure many ills, and we were assured that not very long there would be a cure for cancer. United Nations and other international organizations helped us believe that peace was possible even though we became involved in the Vietnam War, where we did not go in to win a victory. Now, in the midst of all of these things, no one could underestimate the influence and impact of television and the expansion of the means of mass communication. In the mid-60s, 98% of the families in America had a television set, one or more. This made possible a growing world awareness. No matter where it happened, in any part of the world, it was as if it happened next door or in our city, because the news would let us see it and not simply hear it. There was a growing social consciousness. And these things being positive, the negative thing is that television became the first electronic babysitter, and parents and children no longer had to communicate. And today, it has been reported that a child can expect no more than 30 minutes of quality conversation with a parent in an entire week. While I've said these things, I have not even begun to touch the surface of the gathering storm of the challenges that face families, such as alcohol and drug abuse, homelessness, rootlessness, the growing gap between the haves and the have-nots, the kind of unemployment, having an education and expecting a job and being able to have all of the things that you had in your family, but finding that even though you're educated, you can't get a job. Finding the increased diversity in the ethnic and cultural and national and racial situation in our city, and you begin to see that we truly do face different times in our day than in a more settled and stable society. In his book, Signs of Warning, Signs of Hope, J. Kirby Anderson has said that we in this generation face 7 major crises. The crises of purpose, of knowing why we exist and for what, and making a decision about that. The crises of disillusionment, of having had much and of seeing how that has been changed with inflation and a number of other things that are not possible. The crisis of relationship. To whom are you going to be related and why, and can you trust it? The crisis of loneliness. Even though we live in a massive population, there has never been more loneliness than there is in our society, and there are more people over the age of 65 today than have ever lived beyond that point in the history of humanity. The crisis of security, and how many of us have all kinds of security devices, and the crisis of spirituality. What will you believe and what can you trust? The key, he said, is being willing to face the fact that we live in a time of crisis, and crisis means it can go either way. And if we understand the crisis and are willing to face it, then there are reasons for hope. But to meet the challenge, he says, we must have deep and solid convictions. There must be a strong foundation upon which to build, because so many things around us are being built on the shifting sands of time. As a Christian, he said, that foundation, I believe, is Jesus Christ. That sounds very much like the ancient writing of our lesson. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand, and having done all, to stand. But we're not dealing, you see, with physical things that we can attack and fix necessarily. We're dealing with things that are more elusive and things that may not be seen but can be very, devastating. What is that equipment of the armor of God? Truth. I have a friend who says truth is so convenient. It is also important, but it is so hard at times to know what is true and to be able to live in terms of the truth as we see it. Righteousness is not some kind of pseudo-piety of being detached from the world. Righteousness is knowing what is right and being willing to do it as determined not by the society around us, but by the inspiration of God. Where shod your feet with the gospel of peace, let the path you lead be such as when you have passed by, people will not be angry and alienated and lonely, but will be glad you came. Is there any longing greater in our society today as individuals and as nations than for an inner and outer shalom based on solidarity with God? Faith is so critical. Know what you believe and why you believe it and stand firm in it. It is true that there are so many different philosophies and religions and ideas from which to choose today, but let the tolerance of your faith not be such as believes nothing, but the tolerance like that of a mighty skyscraper which can give a little with the winds of differing opinions, but without breaking or giving in to the wind. Carry with you the helmet of salvation. Protect your head. There are so many things to know. So many people clamoring for your attention with differing ideas. Keep your mind clear and know that you are not able to save yourself nor anyone else, and therefore not the world, but God can. Trust then in Jesus, whom he has sent to save us. The Spirit rightly divides between right and wrong, good and evil, life and death. For the Spirit is the Spirit of God within us. Listen, feel that Spirit, and be guided and empowered by it. Prayer and perseverance go together, for it is by prayer that we are connected with God, and it is in God that we know we can persevere. In that spirit, children can obey your parents in the Lord, for it is right and it's also healthy. Parents, do not provoke your children to anger. Give them a foundation on which to build, an armor with which to withstand what the world may present to them. The late Dr. Humphrey Lee, president and chancellor of SMU, told one time of having the outside of his house painted. He was sitting in his study and he heard a loud noise outside, and he went out to see what had happened, and the painter and all of the scaffolding had fallen and was scattered all over the ground. Dr. Lee said to the painter, "What happened?" The man said, "When the thing you're standing on breaks, you ain't got nothing to jump from." Foundations, armor, are important for dealing with life. No other foundation can be laid than that which has been laid by God in Jesus Christ. You have a place to stand. You have reason to hope, if that is the foundation upon which you build. Let us pray. Oh God, we thank you for your presence in our lives, for love which can bond, heal, and forgive, and celebrate. We thank you for families, for or the awareness that we're never alone. For you are with us in Jesus Christ to save us and to show us the way to celebrate life. Bless us then as we offer our prayers in his name and seek to follow him, that we may know the joys of living